They taped a violation notice on my fence before I even unloaded the coffee pot. Said my hedge was 4 inches too tall, and maybe I should consider gifting the back lot to the HOA. Wardell Boone here. Retired internal auditor, just moved in with a deed older than their bylaws. As I pinned their letter beside my father's red-sealed map, the wind knocked the private property sign sideways, same one they'd ignored since '85. Ever had someone pull rank on you? Without checking who you actually were, the letter from the HOA arrived before my coffee even got cold. It was taped with precision to the side of my black mailbox just above the number 203 Pine Ridge Lane. Whoever had done it had taken care to align it straight. That detail annoyed me more than the letter itself. Precision always masks aggression. I'd been on the property less than 3 hours. My dog Winston was still sniffing every corner of the porch like it was his first time out of the kennel. I hadn't even finished unpacking the back of the moving truck when I noticed the pale envelope with the Pine Ridge HOA crest printed in faded maroon. The kind of stationery that tries to look elegant but ends up smelling like toner and cheap authority. I peeled it off and read it standing right there in my driveway. The first line, "Welcome to the Pine Ridge community. Please ensure compliance with neighborhood standards within 48 hours." The next part had a bulleted list. Front hedge exceeds permitted height by approximately 7 inches. Wooden sign in the backyard not pre-approved. Request for consideration donation of parcel C rear to HOA for beautification and easement access. There was a signature at the bottom in crisp, angular strokes Glendora Kitts, HOA, President. I let out a small laugh, one of those short, tired barks of disbelief, and folded the letter in half, slipping it into the back pocket of my jeans. The coffee I had poured earlier was already lukewarm, sitting on the tailgate of the truck next to a box labeled "kitchen stuff, maybe." Winston looked up at me like even he could sense the tone of that message. "Guess we're not in Macon anymore," I muttered. This wasn't my first time dealing with HOAs. As an internal auditor for 3 decades, I'd learned how small institutions can grow claws when they think no one's watching. But still, 48 hours. That was quicker than some marriages in Vegas. As I carried a box of books through the front door, the scent of pine cleaner hit me. The previous owner must have wanted everything sanitized before leaving. Clean slate, maybe. I liked that. I dropped the box inside the hallway, turned around, and stepped through the back door out onto the deck. There, near the edge of the property line, half hidden by a crepe myrtle tree, stood the sign. Boone Property. Do not trespass. Hand-painted, slightly tilted, weathered from years of Georgia storms. My father had put that sign there in 1985, right after he bought the land and retired from the Postal Service. The board was old cedar. He'd chosen it himself, sanded, and sealed it like it mattered. And it did. To him, it marked a boundary not just of land, but of intention. That sign said, "This is mine. I earned it. I built this life, and no one gets to redraw my lines without asking." The idea of some laminated handbook from a suburban committee erasing that, "No, sir." Winston barked suddenly, and I turned to see a woman in a denim jacket and khaki visor walking up the driveway. She carried a small Tupperware container and waved like she'd done this before. "You must be Mr. Boone," she said cheerfully. "I'm Maisie. I live 2 houses down. Thought I'd welcome you properly with cornbread, not paperwork." I smiled genuinely this time. That's a relief. I was beginning to think baked goods were banned under Article 14. She laughed, eyes crinkling behind square glasses. "Oh, don't joke. You'd be surprised what folks around here try to regulate. You got the letter." I assume I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the friendly threat disguised as a welcome note?" She nodded, grimacing. "Yeah. Glendora's thorough. Let's just say she runs the HOA like it's her own little city hall. Best way to stay sane. Know your paperwork and don't let her rattle you." I accepted the cornbread and thanked her. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out toward the lake. From this angle, the water shimmered like a sheet of glass untouched by the morning breeze. "Pretty view," Maisie said. "HOA's been eyeing that back parcel for years, claims it would make a perfect walking trail loop." I didn't respond. Just watched Winston trotting along the edge of the lot, ears perked. After Maisie left, I went into the den and opened the old walnut file cabinet my father had left behind. Most of the documents were dusty yellowing at the edges, labeled in neat block lettering. I found the folder I was looking for: land deed, Boone Estate. Inside was a certified copy of the 1985 deed. Notarized, stamped, recorded at the county office. Clear as daylight, it mapped out the property in its entirety, including the narrow strip of land along the lakeside that the HOA was now encouraging me to give up. I placed the document on the kitchen table next to my half-drunk coffee. Then I walked back out to the porch, leaning against the railing as I stared toward the water. "You picked the wrong retiree to strong-arm," I murmured, and in the breeze the wooden sign creaked slightly, "Still standing, still mine." "I don't believe we've met," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Glendora Kitts, HOA, President." Her grip was firm, but her eyes did the real work, skimming me up and down, not out of flirtation or curiosity, but calculation. The way a poker player reads an opponent after the first hand. I hadn't planned on attending the HOA's quarterly meeting, but Maisie said there'd be free lemonade and folding chairs with back support, and I figured it was time to take stock of who exactly thought they owned this neighborhood. The community center smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and retirement. Rows of gray chairs faced a projector screen. A folding table held a tray of cookies untouched. Most of the attendees were over 60, dressed like they'd just come from brunch or Bible study. There were murmurs when I walked in, some curious, some clipped. Glendora stood at the front beside the screen wearing a coral blazer that seemed to repel all warmth. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet and her pearl earrings didn't move when she did. When I introduced myself, her smile came swiftly, too swiftly. "Ah, Mr. Boone. Parcel, B, right? Near the water." "Actually," I said, "it's Parcel C, with a dock." Her lips tightened a millimeter. "Of course. Welcome." She stepped away before I could ask how she knew which lot was mine. The meeting began with what she called a vision for Pine Ridge. The lights dimmed. The first slide was a generic title, Sustaining Serenity, a 10-year plan. The second slide was more specific, Reclaiming Community Spaces, and there it was in full color, a photo of my dock. The shot had been taken at a distance, probably from the opposite side of the lake. It showed the rickety planks I hadn't touched since moving in the same dock my father used to fish off every Saturday at dawn. The caption underneath read, "Opportunity Zone, Lakeside Expansion Potential." I felt my jaw tighten. No one had asked to photograph my property. No one had called it opportunity when my father scraped algae off those boards in July heat. Glendora clicked through more slides, proposed walking paths, shared gardens, a community gazebo near the waterline, every image inching closer to my backyard. "As many of you know," she said brightly, "some lots in Pine Ridge remain, underutilized. Our goal is not to take but to invite, to prioritize the collective over the individual." There were a few nods. One man coughed into a napkin. I noticed a woman in the back, silver-haired and small-boned, mutter something under her breath. She caught my glance and leaned forward. "Here she goes again," she whispered. Same script, new zip code. After the meeting, I waited until most folks had trickled out. Winston was waiting patiently in the truck, his head resting on the dashboard. I stepped up to Glendora as she packed up her laptop. "Nice slideshow," I said. "Why, thank you. We try to be transparent." I nodded toward the projector. "Curious, though, using my dock as a visual aid. That's a bold move." Her hands didn't pause. "Public interest, Mr. Boone. It's all part of the planning process. We're not singling you out." I tilted my head. "See, I feel like we've met before. Your name, Glendora Kitts. You served on the board at Morning Star Baptist, didn't you?" For the first time, her movements faltered, only slightly. Her fingers brushed the edge of a folder and froze, then resumed. That was many years ago. Different context, same approach. Her smile was slower this time, more mechanical. "Pine Ridge is about moving forward." I didn't say anything more. There was no need to. I'd seen her type before. Polished, assertive, always speaking in we an hour until things went sideways, and suddenly it was you and they. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of ginger ale and opened the HOA website on my laptop. Took some digging, but I found the election results from 6 months back. Glendora had run unopposed. 0 challengers, 3 abstentions. Her name was typed in all caps on the official minutes. I closed the browser and leaned back. Winston padded over and placed his chin on my knee. Outside, the wind rippled across the lake, bending the dogwood trees along the shore. This wasn't her first rodeo, but it might be her last. The next violation came 3 days later. Unauthorized fence placement. Fine, $150 day. It was printed in 12-point Times New Roman bolded and laminated, of course. Taped directly to my front door with a strip of blue painter's tape. Real classy. What made it even funnier was the fence in question hadn't been moved in over 20 years. I stood there in the summer haze, shirt damp with sweat, and reread the notice as thunder rumbled somewhere behind the tree line. Winston circled my legs, sniffing the porch as if trying to detect the hypocrisy in the paper. The line they claimed had shifted, encroaching into what the HOA called Community Buffer Zone 2B. It was nonsense. The fence followed the same curve my father walked with Earl Davison, the surveyor, back in 1998. The posts were weathered, sure, but they hadn't moved. Not a damn inch. Later that morning, as I dragged the trash can to the curb, I saw Ruby Dell tending to her rose bushes. She wore a sun hat the size of a steering wheel and those blue gardening gloves she always forgot to take off before waving. "Morning, Ruby," I called. She straightened up, squinting at me. "You get another love letter from the Queen," I smirked. "This one's about the fence. Says it's wandered off like a teenager." She huffed, bracing her hand against her hip. "That line's been in the same spot since your daddy walked it with Earl. I remember it clear. Earl had a bad knee and tripped over the sprinkler head right by the corner post. That's oddly specific." "I have oddly specific bones," she said. "Want to see something?" She led me back inside her house, an air-conditioned time capsule of crocheted doilies and lemon furniture polish. From a cedar chest beneath the window, she pulled out a folder wrapped in a plastic shopping bag. "Been keeping this since my husband passed. He helped Earl draft it before the HOA even formed," she said, laying the paper out on the kitchen table. It was a hand-drawn copy of the original survey map. The edges were curled, the ink slightly smudged in places, but the lines were clear. I traced the markings, noting the same curve I'd walked 100 times. Then I saw it just near the bottom right corner. A faint pencil note, faded, but legible. Parcel C. Reserved Boone Family Holdings. Ruby leaned over my shoulder, squinting. "That notation's not in their map, is it?" "Nope," I said, pulling out the printed map from the HOA's packet. "Same boundary, same lots, but that line was gone. Erased." "Think they did it on purpose?" she asked. "I think someone wanted it gone badly enough to refile a revision in 2011. Ruby crossed herself. "That's the year Glendora moved in." "Coincidence?" I shook my head slowly. That night I dug through the boxes in the back room old manila folders my father never threw away. In one, labeled Property External, I found a contact card, Vernon Strayhorn, Land Deeds and Transfer Law. I didn't hesitate. Sat down, opened my laptop, and typed Mr. Strayhorn. "Do you still handle historical deeds? We may have a discrepancy involving Parcel C in Pine Ridge." Thunder cracked outside. Winston barked once, then went quiet. I hit send. Some fences don't move, but some lines someone clearly tried to. "You don't forget the Boone line," Vernon said, his fingers pressing down with deliberate weight. "I signed this before half the folks here were born." He slid the old deed across the tabletop between us. It landed with a dry whisper parchment against Formica. The red notary stamp glared up at me like a fresh wound, even though it had been inked in 1985. The Lakeside Diner hadn't changed since the 70s, and Vernon looked like he'd been carved from one of its booths. His cane leaned beside him, scratched from decades of use. The window blinds behind him let slats of late July sun streak the room in dusty lines. The air smelled like bacon grease and lemon-scented wood polish. I'd called him the morning after Ruby handed me the hand-drawn survey map. He didn't hesitate, just told me to meet him here at 2:15 sharp and bring an open mind. "I remember your father," Vernon said, tapping the paper. "Used to talk real low like he was afraid of shaking the dirt. But he was sharp. He fought hard to keep this land free from that first round of zoning in '87. I studied the deed. It was cleaner than I expected, 2 pages notarized on the bottom left corner. Clear property boundaries with Parcel C named outright reserved under Boone Family Holdings. Not subject to HOA authority unless reassigned by heir or appointed proxy. I looked up. That clause always there. Vernon's mouth twitched. "Wrote it myself. Your father insisted. Told me, if someone ever tries to sweet-talk my boy out of this land, make sure it takes a court order or a blood oath." The waitress brought us coffee. Vernon took his black. I added 2 sugars and no cream. As we drank, he pulled out an old leather notary journal. It was scuffed, but the penmanship inside was elegant rows of names, dates, and a quiet sense of permanence. "This your copy?" I asked, flipping to the entry dated May 3rd, 1985. "Sure is. Glendora can redraw maps all she likes, but she can't erase this. You'd need a time machine or a damn fool county clerk." I leaned back, letting that sink in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about hedge heights or fence placements. This was a targeted push. And now, with Vernon's journal and the original deed in hand, I had leverage. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "I need more than just proof. I need to understand their playbook. Vernon raised a bushy brow. You want the bylaws? I nodded. The whole book, especially anything filed after 2010. Vernon grunted, pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and smoothed it across the table. Been keeping this since Glendora tried to reclassify the lake buffer zones in 14. She buried the clause changes under land beautification language. We both leaned over the papers. He pointed to a line under Article 7 property boundaries shall be enforced in alignment with most recent community drafted map. No mention of deed priority, I said. Exactly, Vernon muttered. She's betting no one reads the original documents. Problem is, I do. Just then, a familiar figure passed by the diner window. Maisie. She caught a glimpse of us, her eyebrows rising ever so slightly. By dinner, I was sure every household within 5 blocks would know Wardell Boone had shared pie and paperwork with the town's oldest notary. When I stepped out to my truck an hour later, I found something tucked under the windshield wiper. Folded in thirds, no name printed in blocky typewriter font. She altered the 2011 boundary report. Don't trust it. Shad. The note wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. Shad Harmon had been at every HOA meeting so far, mostly silent, always 2 steps behind Glendora. I sat behind the wheel and read the note again slowly. My stomach turned, but not from fear, from confirmation. This wasn't negligence. This was orchestrated. I dialed Vernon as I pulled out of the lot. He picked up after 1 ring. She's not just bending the rules, I said. She's rewriting them. I figured as much. We need to prepare for the next meeting. He was silent for a beat. Then, son, I think we just found the rope she's going to hang herself with. And, for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The room fell quiet the moment I stepped up to the projector. No microphone, no podium, just the old folded survey map in one hand and a copy of the HOA's revised zoning proposal in the other. I didn't clear my throat or give a speech. I simply laid the hand-drawn map on the projector tray. The image flickered to life on the wall behind me, creased lines ink blotches the Boone name, etched in steady handwriting. There it was, Parcel C, the same dock they tried to erase, and a clear note in faded blue ink, reserved, Boone Family Holdings, not subject to communal reassignment. Nobody spoke. Even the cheap ceiling fan seemed to pause mid-rotation. It was September 2018, a blistering evening that smelled of late summer and lemon polish. The Pine Ridge Community Hall was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it, rows of folding chairs elbow to elbow the side table stacked with untouched lemonade pitchers, condensation beating down their sides. This was no ordinary meeting. The HOA board had called it a special agenda session, which was HOA speak for a power move. Item number 3 on the printed handout said it all. Vote to convert Parcel C to public utility space. I counted no fewer than 2 camera tripods at the back of the room. Maisie had brought cookies, but no one touched them. Even the usual whisperers had gone mute. Glendora sat stiffly at the board table, her coral jacket buttoned to the neck, not a hair out of place. Her fingers drummed an offbeat rhythm against her printed packet. To her right, Shad Harmon looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month. I tapped the next button on the remote. Slide 2, A, side-by-side comparison. On the left, Ruby's annotated land survey. On the right, the 2011 HOA redraft. Same property line, but the HOA version had neatly omitted Parcel C's designation. Gone was the Boone name. Gone was any reference to restricted ownership. I've lived here 3 months, I began. My father lived here 30 years. This I tapped, the map was filed in 1985, notarized, signed, and legally binding. No one interrupted. And this, I pointed to the HOA's version, was drafted in 2011, without public review, without air consent, and without this community's knowledge. I clicked again. Slide 3. A scanned image of Vernon's notary ledger entry dated May 3, 1985, his looping cursive clear as day. Then, the deed itself glowing under the projector lamp, complete with the red notary seal like a drop of blood. Vernon, seated front and center, cleared his throat and slowly stood. I signed this when your current president was still selling condos in Macon, he said. It's valid. It's on record. And it hasn't been overturned, not by court, not by consent, and sure as hell, not by PowerPoint. A few chuckles bubbled through the back rows. I nodded toward Maisie, who tapped on her laptop. Slide 4 appeared an old photograph taken during a town barbecue in 1990. There, in the background, grainy but unmistakable, stood the wooden sign my father painted by hand, Boone property, do not trespass. Stamped on the photo in bright red, Jewel, 1890. I let the silence breathe. Glendora shifted, crossing her legs, then uncrossing them. She reached for her water glass, but it was empty. This is all. Interesting, she finally said, voice smooth but brittle. But we have a process for community reassignment. Regulatory updates are necessary, unless they're illegal, Vernon interrupted from his seat. She blinked. What he means, I added, is that regulatory doesn't mean rewrite history. I could see Shad's foot tapping beneath the table. He looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't, or wouldn't. I let the next slide hang there a second longer, an excerpt from the HOA Charter Article 7, Paragraph 3, highlighted in yellow land, not transferred by written consent of deed-holding party remains private. There was no need to explain further. I didn't need to raise my voice because the paper was speaking for me now. Maps, photos, a red stamp from 1985, a sign painted by a father who didn't believe in loopholes. I stepped back from the projector. I'm not here to sue anyone, I said, calm and even, but I will if someone insists on pretending I don't own what I clearly do. That line landed heavier than anything before it. The board members looked at one another. One of them, a woman named Bernice, who always brought fruit salad to potlucks, closed her folder. Shad swallowed hard. Glendora's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. I turned off the projector, gathered the papers slowly, methodically. Vernon nodded once as I passed. There were no applause, just silence, thick and knotted. But for the first time since I moved in, I felt the tide shift. Not by force, by fact. When Shad knocked on my door that night, he looked like someone who had finally decided to sleep after a year of nightmares. He stood there in the drizzle, hoodie, soaked hands stuffed into his pockets. Winston growled low at first, then went quiet when I opened the door fully. I need to talk, Shad said, voice hoarse. Can I come in? I motioned toward the kitchen. Shoes off. Rain's bad this week. He stepped inside, dripping across the welcome mat. In one hand, he held a manila envelope warped with moisture. In the other, a USB drive looped to a worn keychain. The kitchen smelled of leftover chili and fresh coffee. The lamp over the table cast long shadows across the wood grain. Outside, rain tapped against the gutters like nervous fingers. You're not being recorded, I said. Unless Winston's learned to use a tape deck. Shad gave a dry, broken laugh and sat down, looking 10 years older than he did at the last meeting. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the envelope and laid it flat. It was a memo, an internal HOA directive with Glendora's signature scribbled across the top. Underlined in red ink were the words, Initiate Parcel C conversion. Expedite reclassification. Do not notify public until post-vote. Where did you get this, I asked. I typed it. Shad said, eyes low. She dictated it over lunch. Said it was a formality. I didn't know what it meant at the time. By the time I did, it was filed. I turned the paper slowly in the lamplight. Glendora's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, decisive, tilted like someone always in a hurry. And this, I held up the USB. He hesitated. 2 meeting recordings. Closed-door board sessions, one in January, one in March. Both before I even knew what Parcel C was. You'll hear her push through the reclassification. No votes. Just commands. I got up and plugged the drive into my laptop. Vernon was already on speakerphone, waiting like clockwork. I told him what I was looking at. She's done, Vernon said flatly, even before I played the first clip. We listened together. In the first recording, Glendora's voice was calm, even smug. We can't afford a land dispute. Parcel C needs to become buffer space. If we bury it in the beautification package, no one will notice. In the second, she was more urgent. If anyone asks, the Boone claim is outdated. The county map trumps legacy rights. Just keep it quiet. There was silence on the line. Then Vernon spoke. We write the recall letter tonight. I looked over at Shad. He hadn't touched the coffee I poured him. His eyes were fixed on the tabletop. She promised me a promotion, he whispered. Said I'd be vice chair by spring. Said it was just red tape. You were scared, I said. And now you're here. That counts? He finally looked up. I'll testify. Publicly. You can record me. Hell, I'll stand at the next meeting and read it myself. I nodded slowly. That'll turn whispers into thunder. As we spoke, Ruby arrived. She came through the back door. Coat-soaked cheeks pink with cold. In her hand was a thin blue envelope. I found this in Harold's records, she said, handing it to me, from 1986. He kept it in a folder marked Community Battles. Thought it might come in handy someday. Inside was a copy of a typed letter, yellowed and brittle. At the bottom, in Harold's faded handwriting, Parcel C, confirmed Boone. Any dispute is fiction. It hit harder than anything Shad had brought. This wasn't just paperwork, it was legacy carried through steady hands and folded corners. The three of us sat around that table like quiet conspirators. The rain outside grew louder, but inside the stillness was electric. Vernon cleared his throat on speaker. "I'll draft the recall tonight. We'll need 5 signatures to initiate." "You'll have 15, Ruby said calmly. "Maybe more." By morning, word had spread like ivy. Emails flew through inboxes. Printed maps circled mailboxes. Whispered hallway chats turned into hallway declarations. Even the pickleball group at the rec center was talking about the Boone situation. Then came the notice. Delivered in manila envelopes to each doorstep, it read, "The scheduled HOA general meeting has been postponed due to medical illness. We will reschedule upon President Kit's recovery. No date, no substitute chair, just absence." I stood at my mailbox, the letter dangling from my fingers as the wind caught it. "She's running," Ruby said, stepping beside me. "Or hiding," I murmured. Either way, the chorus had begun, and there wasn't enough whiteout in the world to erase what we'd just made visible. Glendora didn't show up to the emergency meeting. No note, no statement. Just an empty chair at the end of the folding table where she'd presided over so many community improvement plans with the sharpness of a gavel. But Vernon did. He stood straighter than usual, wearing a dark blue vest and a tie that had seen a better decade. His cane clicked as he walked to the front of the Pine Ridge clubhouse and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. Motion to recall. 3 words typed in bold. The vote wasn't dramatic. The room was packed with quiet resolution. Hands lifted one by one, some slow, some shaky, but all counted. 24 in favor, 0 opposed. And just like that, the silence she'd used as her shield became the verdict that ended her reign. I sat near the back elbows on the table, a manila envelope beside me labeled Parcel C, Final. Outside, the air carried a gentle chill. Pine needles littered the edges of the sidewalk and a few gold leaves skittered past the open clubhouse door. Fall had taken hold, but it didn't feel like an ending, more like a clearing. Vernon stepped back from the table and nodded to me. "You're up." I rose slowly. My knees ached more than usual, but my hands were steady. I took the envelope and walked to the front. Inside was the new deed prepared, signed, and awaiting final witness. "I'm not here to sue anyone," I said, letting the words settle across the room. I never was. But what started as a letter about hedge height turned into something else. And once that starts, you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. I paused. That said, I'm not here to keep old fences either. I held up the new deed. Parcel C will remain Boone property in name, but I've signed a partial donation. This section here, I pointed to a sketched section marked in light green, will become Boone Grove, a public garden, native plants, low maintenance, open to all. Gasps. Then quiet murmurs. Not disbelief, something closer to gratitude. Maybe even shame. I hope I added we plant it together. Vernon reached for the document and with careful precision notarized the final signature. His pen left a steady flourish. Ruby stepped forward and handed him a sprig of lavender wrapped in twine. "I'd like to plant the first one," she said, voice steady. "Of course," I smiled. Maisie wiped her eyes in the back row. A man I barely knew clapped once, then stopped unsure if it was allowed. "Let's build something better than rules," I said quietly. The moment held. Then, Vernon, as if remembering something from a different file drawer in his mind, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "She left this for you," he said, handing it over. My name was scrawled across the front in Glendora's unmistakable cursive. No return address, no explanation, just silence waiting to be broken. The letter was cream-colored, folded once, no envelope. Just my name on the front in slanted cursive, Glendora's, though smaller now. Not the sweeping loops she once used when signing HOA violations. I read it alone, sitting on the back porch. Winston asleep at my feet. "Dear Mr. Boone, you were right, and I was wrong, louder than I realized. I confused control with care. I read your father's deed. I read it twice. I think I understand now not just what it said, but why it was written that way. You defended something more than land. You reminded me of what community should feel like. I'll be gone by the time you read this, but I hope truly that the garden grows. Yours not formally, but sincerely, Glendora Kitts." I folded the page along its original crease and slipped it into the wooden memorial box where I kept my father's old penknife, the 1985 deed, and a photo of him building the dock in cut-off jeans and a Braves cap. The sun warmed the porch slats as I stood and walked the short path down toward Boone Grove. It had started blooming early violets, goldenrod, creeping thyme. Someone had planted milkweed for the butterflies. Someone else had tied little names to seedling stakes from Ella for Grammy. The kids had made it theirs. At the far end, near the lake curve, stood a cedar sign carved by a local vet who did woodwork in his garage. Boone Grove. Donated in trust, in gratitude. Wardell Boone, 2019. A small crowd had gathered for the dedication. Ruby held a paper cup with lemonade and dabbed her eyes occasionally with the corner of her scarf. Maisie wore gardening gloves and was already patting down the soil around a clump of zinnias. Shad stood near the picnic table, clipboard in hand. He looked healthier now. Lighter. "You sure you don't want a seat on the board?" he asked quietly when I passed. I shook my head. "Let this garden be my only vote." He smiled, didn't press. Vernon couldn't make it. His hip surgery kept him in Atlanta, but he'd sent a message through his niece. He said to tell you, "Job well done. And that woman still owes you lemonade." The small laugh I let out surprised even me. Someone rang a small bell. We gathered around the plaque. I watched children step forward with tiny shovels planting marigolds and mint. The dirt smelled alive. The air was clean with spring. The ceremony wound down slowly like the last verse of a hymn. People lingered not out of obligation, but because it felt good to just be there. No bylaws, no motions. Just being. Later I walked Winston down the gravel path that edged the lake. My father's dock still stood newly scrubbed with a coat of stain Ruby's nephew had offered to apply just because. I cast a line into the water, not really hoping for a bite, just habit, just rhythm. Winston curled up beside me, tail thudding once before settling. Behind us, someone spoke. "Feels more honest here now." I didn't turn, just smiled toward the lake and let the line sit loose in the water. Some things don't need an answer. The morning after the dedication, I noticed the lavender had taken root, its stems upright, holding dew like quiet trophies. The old wooden sign, once cracked and weather-worn, had been sanded and sealed by someone who never said a word about it. Sometimes the best victories aren't declared. They're planted. Dignity doesn't demand applause, it just asks that you stand your ground with grace. Even broken fences can be mended if someone decides the view beyond them is worth sharing. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Tell me your story, or if this one reminded you of someone who chose peace over pride. And if you'd like more tales like this, feel free to follow along.